In the mid-1980s, the city of Los Angeles was terrorized by a killer whose crimes were so brutal, so senseless, and so random that no one felt safe. He struck in the dead of night, slipping into homes under the cover of darkness, leaving a trail of death and destruction. He became known as the Night Stalker. But behind that terrifying nickname was a man named Richard Ramirez, a man whose dark descent into evil would shake California to its core. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez, more commonly known as Richard Ramirez and referred to as the Night Stalker, was an American serial killer and sex offender. His crime spree took place between April 1984 and August 1985, primarily in the greater Los Angeles area and the San Francisco Bay Area, California. During this time, Ramirez killed at least 14 people, often during daytime break-ins, earning him multiple nicknames, including the Night Stalker, the Walk-In Killer, and the Valley Intruder. In 1989, he was convicted and sentenced to death, but he died in 2013 while still on death row. Richard Ramirez's crimes were deeply shaped by his troubled upbringing. He endured frequent abuse from his father, leading to brain damage, and began using drugs by the age of 10. In his early teens, he developed disturbing interests under the influence of his older cousin, a Vietnam War veteran who suffered from schizophrenia and PTSD. His cousin would boast about the war crimes he committed, and, when Ramirez was 15, even killed his wife in front of him. Ramirez also learned military tactics from his cousin, which he later applied during his killing spree. Alongside a growing fascination with Satanism and the occult, Ramirez moved to California at 22, where his cocaine use escalated. He supported his addiction through burglaries, many of which escalated into violent crimes, including murders, attempted murders, rapes, attempted rapes, and assaults. Ramirez's murder spree terrorized the greater Los Angeles area and later the San Francisco Bay Area for 14 months. His first known murder, however, occurred in April 1984, though it wasn't linked to him until 2009. Ramirez employed a wide range of weapons during his attacks, including handguns, knives, a machete, a tire iron, and a claw hammer. He often punched, pistol whipped, and strangled his victims, either with his hands or, in one case, with a ligature. He brutally stomped one victim to death in her sleep and tortured another by electrocuting her with a live electrical cord. Ramirez also took pleasure in degrading and humiliating his victims, particularly those he chose not to kill or who survived his attacks. In 1989, Richard Ramirez was found guilty of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The judge who upheld his 19 death sentences described his actions as displaying cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Throughout his trial and imprisonment, Ramirez showed no remorse for his crimes. He died on June 7, 2013, from complications related to B-cell lymphoma while awaiting execution on California's death row. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, to Mexican immigrants Mercedes Munoz and Julian Tapia Ramirez. He was the youngest of 5 children. His father, a railway worker, struggled with alcoholism and had frequent bouts of rage, often leading to physical abuse of his wife and children. Raised in a Catholic household, Ramirez started using marijuana and alcohol by the age of 10. Psychiatrist Michael Stone characterizes Richard Ramirez as a made psychopath, rather than a born one. He suggests that Ramirez's schizoid personality disorder played a significant role in his lack of empathy for his victims and his resistance to treatment. Stone also noted that Ramirez experienced several incidents of unconsciousness and near-death experiences before the age of 6, which contributed to the development of temporal lobe epilepsy, increased aggression, and hypersexuality later in life. At age 12, Ramirez was taken under the wing of his older cousin, Miguel Angel Mike Vales, a decorated Green Beret in the U.S. Army who himself had already become a serial killer and rapist during his service in the Vietnam War. Mike often boasted of committing gruesome war crimes in Vietnam and shared Polaroid photos with Ramirez showing Vietnamese women whom he had raped, murdered, and dismembered or decapitated. It is alleged that many of these photos depicted women being tied to trees or wooden posts. Both before and after, they were sexually assaulted and killed by Vales. While incarcerated, Ramirez later revealed that he was more fascinated than repelled by the stories and images his cousin Mike shared with him. Mike, a Vietnam War veteran, taught Ramirez military skills, including stealth and methods for killing. During this time, Ramirez began sleeping in a local cemetery to escape his father's violent outbursts. And on some occasions, his father even tied him to a crucifix in the cemetery overnight as punishment. Mike and his wife, Josefina Jessie Vales, had a son named Miguel Vales Jr., who tragically died in a gas explosion at the age of 5. It remains uncertain whether Ramirez had any interaction with his younger cousin before his death. Shortly after Ramirez had turned 14 in 1974, he began using LSD frequently. He and Mike resumed bonding over their shared use of drugs and alcohol. It was during this period that Ramirez began to cultivate an interest in Satanism and the occult. When he reached adolescence, Ramirez began to meld his burgeoning sexual fantasies with graphic violence, including forced bondage, murder, mutilation, and rape. While still in school, he took jobs at a local Holiday Inn and used his master key to rob sleeping patrons. In at least one occasion, Ramirez molested 2 children in an elevator at the hotel, but he was never reported or prosecuted for this act. His employment ended abruptly after Ramirez attempted to rape a woman in her hotel room and was caught in the act by the victim's husband. Although the husband beat Ramirez at the scene, criminal charges were dropped when the couple, who lived out of state, declined to return to Texas to testify against him. At 15, Richard Ramirez witnessed his cousin Mike fatally shoot his second wife, 26-year-old Jessie Vales, in the face during a domestic argument on May 4, 1975. Similar to his reaction to Mike's war stories and graphic photos, Ramirez later expressed that witnessing the murder was not traumatic, but instead fascinated him. Following the incident, Ramirez became withdrawn and distant from his family and peers. Mike was found not guilty of Jessie's murder by reason of insanity, with the act attributed to post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service. Shortly after this event, Ramirez dropped out of Jefferson High School in the 9th grade, just before the school year ended in 1975. Shortly after the shooting, Richard Ramirez moved in with his older sister Ruth and her husband, Roberto, who was a compulsive peeping Tom. Roberto would take Ramirez along on his nightly voyeuristic activities. After Mike was released from the mental hospital in 1977, he occasionally joined Ramirez and Roberto in spying on women through their windows. In 1982, at the age of 22, Ramirez moved to California, where he eventually settled. Around this time, he began using cocaine, which quickly became his preferred drug. To fund his addiction, Ramirez started committing thefts and burglaries. During this period, he lived a transient lifestyle, moving between San Francisco and Los Angeles County before his eventual incarceration. On April 10, 1984, Richard Ramirez murdered 9-year-old Mei Leung in the basement of his apartment building in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. The crime wasn't linked to Ramirez until 2009, when DNA evidence from the scene matched his profile. In 2016, authorities revealed the presence of a second suspect, identified through another DNA sample collected from the scene, who was believed to have been at the murder. This individual, described as a juvenile at the time, has not been publicly identified or charged due to insufficient evidence. On June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was discovered murdered in her apartment in Glassell Park, Los Angeles. She had been stabbed multiple times in the head, neck, and chest while asleep, with her throat slashed so severely that she was nearly decapitated. Ramirez's fingerprint was found on a mesh screen he had removed to enter through an open window. This marked his second known murder and established a pattern of breaking into homes, committing brutal murders, and burglarizing his victims, often to support his drug addiction and pay his rent. 9 months later, on March 17, 1985, Ramirez attacked 22-year-old Maria Hernandez outside her home in Rosemead, shooting her in the face with a .22 caliber handgun as she entered her garage. She survived when the bullet ricocheted off her keys, which she had raised to protect herself. Pretending to be dead, Hernandez waited for Ramirez to leave the scene. Inside the house, her roommate, 34-year-old Dale Yoshi Okazaki, heard the gunshot and hid behind a counter. When she raised her head to see what was happening, Ramirez shot her once in the forehead, killing her instantly. Less than an hour later, Ramirez pulled 30-year-old Leon Veronica Yu out of her car in Monterey Park and shot her twice with the same handgun, fleeing the scene. Yu was pronounced dead at the hospital. The two murders and attempted third in a single day drew significant media attention, with the press dubbing the attacker the walk-in killer and the Valley Intruder, describing him as curly-haired with bulging eyes and widely spaced, rotting teeth. 1 week later, around 2 a.m., on March 27, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into a home he had burglarized the previous year, just outside Whittier. He shot 64-year-old Vincent Charles Zatsara in the head while he slept, killing him instantly. His wife, 44-year-old Maxine Lavinia Zatsara, woke up to the sound of the gunshot. Ramirez beat and bound her, demanding to know where the valuables were. As he ransacked the room, Maxine managed to free herself and grabbed a shotgun from under the bed, unaware that it wasn't loaded. She pulled the trigger just as Ramirez turned to see her. Enraged, Ramirez shot her 3 times, killing her. He then went to the kitchen to retrieve a large carving knife, mutilated her body by carving an inverted cross into her chest, and removed her eyes, placing them in a jewelry box, which he kept as a souvenir. He attempted to have sex with her body, but was too disturbed by her earlier attempt to shoot him. Ramirez left footprints from his obvious sneakers in the flower beds, which were photographed and cast by police. Ballistics from the scene matched those from previous attacks, confirming that a serial killer was responsible. On May 14, 1985, Ramirez returned to Monterey Park, breaking into the home of 66-year-old Bill Doy and his disabled wife, 56-year-old Lillian Doy. He surprised Bill in the bedroom and shot him in the face with a .22 semi-automatic pistol as Bill reached for his own gun. After beating him unconscious, Ramirez entered Lillian's room, bound her with thumb cuffs, and raped her after ransacking the house for valuables. Bill later died from his injuries in the hospital. 2 weeks later, on May 29, Richard Ramirez drove a stolen car to Monrovia and targeted the home of 83-year-old Mabel Ma Bell and her 81-year-old disabled sister, Florence Nettie Lang. After finding a hammer in the kitchen, Ramirez bludgeoned and bound Lang in her bedroom, then did the same to Bell before using an electrical cord to shock her. After raping Lang, he used Bell's lipstick to draw a satanic pentagram on her thigh and on the walls of both bedrooms. The women were discovered 2 days later, alive but in comas. Bell later died from her injuries on July 15, and Lang passed away in August. The following day, Ramirez used the same stolen car to travel to Burbank, where he broke into the home of 42-year-old Carol Kyle. Holding her at gunpoint, he handcuffed Kyle and her 11-year-old son before ransacking the house. He released Kyle to show him where the valuables were, then raped her repeatedly. Ramirez threatened her, warning her not to look at him, and at one point saying he would cut her eyes out. After retrieving her son from the closet, he bound them together with the handcuffs before fleeing. On the night of July 2, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Arcadia and randomly chose the home of 75-year-old widow Mary Louise Cannon. He quietly entered the house and found her asleep in her bedroom. Ramirez bludgeoned her with a lamp, rendering her unconscious, and then stabbed her to death with a 10-inch butcher knife from her kitchen. He continued stabbing her body even after she was already dead. 3 nights later, Richard Ramirez broke into a home in Sierra Madre and attacked 16-year-old Whitney Bennett while she was sleeping, striking her with a tire iron. After failing to find a knife in the kitchen, he attempted to strangle her with a telephone cord. Ramirez later claimed he was shocked to see electrical sparks coming from the cord, and when Bennett began to breathe again, he fled the scene, believing that Jesus Christ had saved her. Despite the brutal assault, Bennett survived, though she needed 478 stitches to close the wounds on her scalp. On July 7, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of 60-year-old Joyce Lucio Nelson in Monterey Park. He found her asleep on her living room couch and brutally beat her to death by repeatedly stomping on her face, leaving an obvious sneaker print imprinted on her skin. After driving through 2 other neighborhoods, Ramirez returned to Monterey Park and targeted the home of 63-year-old Sophie Dickman. He assaulted her at gunpoint, handcuffed her, and attempted to rape her. After stealing her jewelry, when Dickman insisted he had taken everything of value, Ramirez demanded that she swear on Satan. 2 weeks later, on July 20, Richard Ramirez bought a machete and drove a stolen Toyota to Glendale. He targeted the home of 66-year-old Leila Needing and her 68-year-old husband, Maxon Needing. Ramirez burst into their bedroom while they slept and attacked them with the machete before shooting them in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. He further mutilated their bodies with the machete and then robbed the house of valuables. After quickly selling the stolen items, he drove to Sun Valley, Los Angeles, and broke into the home of the Covenant family. Ramirez shot 32-year-old Chainarong Covenant in the head while he slept, killing him instantly. He then repeatedly raped and beat 32-year-old Samkit Covenant. Ramirez tied up their 8-year-old son before forcing Samkit to show him where the valuables were. During the assault, he demanded that she swear to Satan that she wasn't hiding any money from him. Following news coverage of his crimes closely, Richard Ramirez left Los Angeles and headed to San Francisco. On August 18, he broke into the home of 66-year-old Peter Pan and 62-year-old Barbara Pan. Ramirez shot the sleeping Peter in the temple with a .25 caliber handgun, killing him instantly. He then beat and sexually assaulted Barbara before shooting her in the head and leaving her for dead. At the crime scene, Ramirez used lipstick to draw a pentagram and write "Jack the Knife" on the bedroom wall. Detectives found a shoe print at the scene, which matched a rare pair of Avia shoes connected to previous crimes. Lead detectives Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo contacted the manufacturer of the shoes and obtained the soles for comparison. They found that only 6 pairs of the men's size 11.5 existed across the U.S. -5 were shipped to Arizona, and 1 to a store in Los Angeles. This made it clear that the 1 pair in California belonged to the perpetrator. When ballistics and shoe print evidence from the Los Angeles crime scenes were matched to the Pan murder in San Francisco, then Mayor Dianne Feinstein revealed key details, including the gun caliber, in a televised press conference. This disclosure enraged detectives, as they knew the killer was following media coverage and could use this information to destroy crucial evidence. Indeed, Ramirez watched the press conference and that night threw his sneakers off the Golden Gate Bridge. He stayed in the San Francisco area for a few more days before returning to Los Angeles. On August 24, 1985, Richard Ramirez drove a stolen orange Toyota 76 miles south of Los Angeles to Mission Viejo. That night, he arrived at the home of 45-year-old James Romero Jr., who had just returned from a family vacation in Rosarito Beach, Mexico. Romero's 13-year-old son, James Romero III, happened to be awake. While the rest of the family slept, James went outside to retrieve a pillow from a locked truck. Hearing a rustling noise, he initially thought it was an animal and investigated, but didn't find anything unusual. James then went to his garage to work on his mini-bike, but soon heard footsteps outside. Suspecting a prowler, he looked out his bedroom window and spotted Ramirez. James quickly woke his parents, and Ramirez fled. James then ran outside, noting the color, make, and style of the car, as well as part of the license plate number. Believing his son had chased away a thief, Romero contacted the police with this information. After failure on the Romero residence, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of 30-year-old Bill Carnes and his fiancée, 29-year-old Inez Erickson, through a back door. He entered their bedroom and woke Carnes by cocking his .25 caliber handgun. Ramirez shot Carnes 3 times in the head, then turned his attention to Erickson. Identifying himself as the Night Stalker, he forced her to swear she loved Satan while he beat her with his fists and tied her up using neckties from the closet. After stealing valuables, Ramirez dragged Erickson to another room and raped her. He demanded more cash and jewelry, making her swear on Satan that she wasn't hiding anything. Before leaving, he told her, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." Erickson freed herself and sought help from a neighbor. Surgeons later removed 2 of the 3 bullets from Carnes' head, and he survived the attack. Inez Erickson provided investigators with a detailed description of her attacker, and police collected a footprint cast from the Romero residence. On August 28, the stolen Toyota Ramirez had used was found abandoned in Koreatown, Los Angeles. Despite his attempts to wipe the car clean of evidence, police managed to recover a single fingerprint from the rearview mirror. This fingerprint was positively identified as Richard Ramirez's, a 25-year-old drifter from Texas with a criminal record, including arrests for traffic violations and drug offenses. The identification was considered a near miracle because the fingerprint system used to match his print had only recently been installed and contained records of criminals born after January 1, 1960, just 2 months before Ramirez's birth. On August 29, 1985, law enforcement released a mugshot of Ramirez from a 1984 auto theft arrest to the media. At the police press conference, they declared, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place you can hide." On August 30, 1985, Richard Ramirez boarded a bus to Tucson, Arizona, intending to visit his brother, unaware that he was the top news story on nearly every major newspaper and TV broadcast across California. When his brother wasn't home, Ramirez returned to Los Angeles early on the morning of August 31. He walked right past police officers who were staking out the bus terminal, hoping to catch him if he tried to escape on another bus. Ramirez then entered a convenience store in East Los Angeles. After noticing a group of elderly Hispanic women fearfully identifying him as El Matador, Richard Ramirez saw his face on the front page of La Opinion, labeled as the Invasor Nocturno. Panicked, he fled the store and ran across the Santa Ana freeway. Ramirez attempted to carjack an unlocked Ford Mustang, but was pulled out by angry residents Faustino Pinon and Jose Burgoyne. He then ran across the street and tried to take car keys from Angelina de la Torre, but her husband, Manuel de la Torre, saw the attempt and hit Ramirez over the head with a fence post as he pursued him. A group of more than 10 residents, including Burgoyne's sons, joined the chase and caught up with Ramirez on Hubbard Street in Boyle Heights, where they restrained and beat him. Around 8 a.m., police responded to a call about a disturbance in the area, arriving quickly to find Ramirez severely beaten. They took him into custody. Jury selection for Richard Ramirez's trial began on July 22, 1988. During his first court appearance, he raised his hand, displaying a pentagram drawn on it, and shouted, "Hail Satan!" On August 3, 1988, the Los Angeles Times reported that jail employees had overheard Ramirez plotting to shoot the prosecutor with a gun he planned to have smuggled into the courtroom. In response, a metal detector was installed outside the courtroom, and intensive searches were conducted on everyone entering. On September 20, 1989, Ramirez was convicted on all 43 charges, including 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. During the penalty phase on November 7, 1989, he was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber. After the sentencing, Ramirez told reporters, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." The trial cost $1.8 million, making it the most expensive murder trial in California's history at the time, until the O.J. Simpson case in 1994. During the trial, Ramirez gained a following, with fans writing letters and visiting him. Starting in 1985, Doreen Lightway wrote him nearly 75 letters during his imprisonment. Ramirez proposed to her in 1988, and they were married on October 3, 1996, at California's San Quentin State Prison. Lightway had previously stated that she would commit suicide if Ramirez were ever executed. However, by the time of his death in 2013, Ramirez was engaged to a 23-year-old writer. On August 7, 2006, Richard Ramirez's first round of state appeals ended unsuccessfully when the California Supreme Court upheld his convictions and death sentence. A request for a rehearing was denied by the court on September 7, 2006. Ramirez had additional appeals pending at the time of his death. He passed away on June 7, 2013, at Marin General Hospital in Green Bay, California, due to complications from B-cell lymphoma. He also suffered from chronic substance abuse and hepatitis C. His body was not claimed, so it was cremated. The story of Richard Ramirez is not just the story of a killer, it's the story of a city gripped by fear and a community that fought back. It's the story of how evil can lurk behind the face of an ordinary man, and how the randomness of violence can shake us to our core. It's also the story of justice. Ramirez was caught, convicted, and sentenced for his horrific crimes. And though he died before his execution, his reign of terror was brought to an end.